The Week in Review with David Davis.
Okay, well, welcome back to the Week in Review. It's been a tumultuous week right from the beginning. I mean, the sacking of Nadeem Zahawi and the tumult of the strikes rather overshadowed what I think was the Prime Minister's wish to highlight what he's doing on healthcare. I mean, he's going to have 800 new ambulances, including 100 specialist ones for mental health. They're going to have 5,000 more sustainable hospital beds, backed by about £1 billion in dedicated funds. But as I say, rather overwhelmed by other bits of news. The big bit of news from my own personal point of view was the Big Brother Watch, the organisation Big Brother Watch, launched a study into what the government had been up to during the pandemic. And it was this thing called the Ministry of Truth. And it was gathered a huge amount of evidence that the government had been keeping an eye on, to put it mildly, journalists, academics, and actually MPs, including me. And they turned out they have 5 government units involved: the Counter Disinformation Unit, the Rapid Response Unit, the Government Information Cell, the Research Information and Communication Unit, and it's asserted the 77th Brigade Army Unit, all in different bits of the government, in the Home Office, the Foreign Office, the Cabinet Office, the MOD, and DCMS. So really very important stuff. And I discussed it with Julia Hartley-Brewer on her programme, because she was another one. She was a journalist who herself was monitored, and indeed her programme Talk TV was actually taken off air by YouTube at one point.
It appears that they're trying to constrain the debate, shut down the debate, by flagging. That's the phrase they use in some of the documents, flagging up things said by you, by me, by other MPs.
At the beginning of every year, I like to look at what the upcoming technologies are, what's going to have an impact both socially and indeed politically. So it has impacts for the economy and for the way government behaves. And each year, these things get more dramatic. So this year, we're going to have a look over the next few weeks at I think up to 10 or a dozen new technologies, but they include some really interesting things. I mean, a shift in chip design and chip manufacture is dominated really by a few big people, mostly in China. There's a change in design which may give or take away that advantage and give advantages to smaller operators and smaller manufacturers, and maybe bring some of it back to the West. Again, something we can talk about at length another time. There's major advances on the CRISPR gene editing tool, owes much of its origin to work here in Cambridge and other places, and looks to me to becoming a really potentially powerful medical tool for curing genetic and other diseases. We've got progress being made on genetically engineered organs. In other words, we can perhaps manufacture organs for people who need organ replacement, something again. Also, perhaps more exotically, I mean, this year the Nobel Prize was given for what you might term ancient DNA, DNA from Neanderthals and so on. May sound something that has no implication for modern times, but the indications are that a Neanderthal gene led to 1 million deaths over COVID. So it may well give us a lot of information in terms of our current status in terms of immunity to disease. We've got recycling of batteries, pretty obviously an important issue. I mean, batteries are going to dominate the technology of the next several decades, and how we cope with them, how we recover the lithium and other components of them are going to be very important, and there are big advances on that. Vaccine development, of course, the great technology of the last few years has been mRNA vaccines and their applicability. I mean, they've got obvious benefits, but also a lot of people worried about the risks associated with them. But they've got obvious applications elsewhere. Now, we need to make sure that we know what we're doing there, but also that we get the best out of them. And that's something which post-Brexit, Britain may well play a major part in, but it's got to be got right. And there are other issues on the environmental front. We've got technologies to protect various sorts of environment, but also new threats. I mean, deep sea mining is, I think, going to become a bigger and bigger issue over the years, and we need to make sure that we have the environmental legislation to make sure that we don't regret taking that route in the future. So a whole series of things which, as I say, we'll talk about in the next month or two. Along the way, of course, one of the big ones that the MIT Technology Review highlighted was the use of drones, and particularly military drones. Now, everybody, having watched the Ukraine war, now knows about this, but this first manifested itself in the Nagorno-Karabakh conflict, in which the Azerbaijanis, backed by Turkey, absolutely demolished the armoured attacks from Armenia, backed by Russia. And essentially it was using comparatively cheap drones from Turkey and Israel to identify, target particularly big tank battalions, and then bring them under artillery fire. And artillery fire can be enormously destructive, even against modern tanks. So that's rather relevant too, because this week one of the other big issues has been the German decision to release Leopard 2 tanks to go to Ukraine, and indeed the American decision to release Abrams tanks, as well as our Challenger 2s. So there's a whole series, there's been a lot of excitement about releasing these tanks, but the Ukrainians, not unnaturally, have said, well, we want air cover for them. We don't want them destroyed by missile strikes and so on, and from the air. And of course, they're not being allowed the F-16. So, we need to think the technology changes mean we need to think very carefully about what the best way to help Ukraine win this war is. And it takes a bit more than just enthusiasm. I mean, it's great to have people like Boris Johnson and others keen to support Ukraine. We all are. But we've got to think through very carefully that we don't give them something which leads them into a technology trap in military terms. So big story on drones. Just so you know, I mean, the Bayraktar drone, which was the one which came to the fore first in Nagorno-Karabakh, and has been very important in Ukraine, costs about $5.5 million, $6 million equipped with some sort of weaponry or surveillance kit, compares with what, 40 million plus for a Predator or Reaper drone, the things that people are used to seeing post-Afghan war and so on. So big changes in technology, economics of warfare, and it also brings up the issue of how we spend money to get the best effect. We've been told in the last week, by Americans in particular, that our army and defense forces are no longer what they term tier one, top grade, because of lack of money. So we need more money, there's no doubt about that, but it's important we spend it properly. I said in the House this week, in every one of the last 25 years, the Public Accounts Committee has criticised the MOD for bad use of public money, overspending, cost overruns, delays, poor choice strategically of equipment. We've got to get all that right. And with such big changes in technology, that's got more difficult, but also potentially more productive. We may well be able to get literally more bang for our buck. The week, as I said, has been dominated by strikes, whether it's train drivers, civil servants, airport, university staff, huge wave of strikes. And this was obviously coming in some respects, and I've already written about it before. I think there are various modern approaches to preserving workers' rights, whilst at the same time limiting or minimizing the damage to the public. Always the phrase I used before was that a strike is a weapon with a worker at both ends, and we want to make sure that we give workers the decent outcomes and a proper ability to negotiate without actually harming all of society. So there are links to that to that document below. So if you're interested in it, have a look there. This week's the third anniversary of Brexit, and there's been lots and lots of debate. I mean, bluntly, not very high quality debate on air about this. I mean, the trouble with Brexit is you have two competing echo chambers, neither of whom pay proper attention to each other. So that's been going on, and we'll return to that to deal with it rather more scientifically, I hope, in the next few weeks. Pull the figures together so people can understand what's going on, and also what the opportunities still are, because there's still a lot to be done. But at the same time, in the last week, we've had a study, the World Economic Outlook by the IMF, come out, which has said that we are going to be the only country, really, of the modern OECD or G7 countries and so on, that's going to have a recession in the coming year. Well, actually, have a look back. I mean, in the context of Brexit, the IMF's own studies, they were forecasting doom and gloom before. In practice, we had one of the best years in 2022 of the modern nations. So we shouldn't treat forecasts as facts. A lot depends on what the government does in the budget coming up. The IMF's claim was that the negative, what they expect to be a recession, is driven by high taxes. I have some sympathy with that. I happen to think that in the course of a recession, you should allow yourself to have deficit financing in the short term, not massively, not over the top, not Trussonomics, just sensible deficit financing to make up for the money that's sucked out of the economy by high energy prices, by international inflation of raw goods and partial manufacturers like chips and so on, silicon chips and so on. So you ought to make up for that with some tax cuts, but I'll come back to that again later. But as I say, we did better than they said before, and I expect we'll do better than they're saying now. Economic forecasts are far more trusted, far more than they ought to be. A few years ago, I raised this matter in the House of Commons, and really with a presumption that pretty much every single economic forecast made by anybody is always wrong.
Thank you, Speaker. The Treasury, the OBR and the Bank of England, between them, produce numerous forecasts every year. When was the last time any of them got one right?
Mr. Secretary. Well, I suspect, Mr. Speaker, in the history of highly detailed, complicated economic forecasts with a myriad of variables, there's probably not one in the entire history of the planet that has been entirely right in every respect. But that is not an argument. That is not an argument that the Right Honourable Gentleman deploy not to go out and do an honest and sensible appraisal of what the likely outcomes are going to mean, both fiscally in terms of GDP, as we go forward.
Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. Hit like and subscribe if you did. There are sources to everything I referred to today below, so you can go back and check the facts. I always think it's very important in politics to work off the data, and we'll be returning to these subjects in the coming weeks, from technology and its impact on policy, through some of the military issues, through to some of the Brexit issues, where I'm going to do a rather more in-depth analysis than perhaps we've seen in the third anniversary week. So thank you for watching. See you next week.